going on, people? Um, I decided that I'm gonna do 2 reviews in a day, which will probably never happen again. But I don't know. Bored. I don't really have a whole lot to do with my night, so let's talk about the latest release from Bone Thugs and Harmony, Art of War, World War III. Um, this is one of my favorite groups. Actually, this is probably one of the main groups that pretty much got me into hip hop. Out of Cleveland, Ohio, discovered by the late Eazy-E. Mostly known for their distinctive style of, rapid fire, fast flows, use of harmonizing throughout the tracks. They've been in the game for a while. Group has broken up a few times over the years, and they get back together, put out something, and some members leave and they come back. They all pretty much have solo albums out. So yeah, lately a lot of them have been kind of just doing their own thing, and now they're back, kind of, sort of, with an album. And I say kind of, sort of, because from what I read a interview with Crazy Bone, and apparently this album wasn't a total group effort. I believe him and Wishbone weren't really too much a part of this album, and you'll definitely notice that when you listen to it, because Lazy, Busy, and Fleshbone pretty much carry the weight of this. Crazy Bone and Wishbone are very scarcely placed throughout this album. They only appear on a few tracks. But let's get into it. First thing I gotta say about this album is that I was happy that they got back with the original producer, DJ Unique, who did East 1999 for them, which, pretty much their staple album. And he definitely makes his presence felt on numerous. I think he pretty much did every beat on here, and he has that that nice vintage kind of Bone Thugs feel, that more kind of just gritty, dark production on some of these tracks, and it's good to hear. It's definitely good to hear that sound back, especially on tracks like Murder on You, Approach to Danger, Top Notch, which is one of the opening tracks, and It's a Bone Thing, and Deep End. All those tracks, when I first heard them, it just kind of took me back to like the first time I started listening to the group, and it reminded me of why this was pretty much one of my favorite groups to listen to. But not every track is extra, gritty and dark. I have a few switch up sounds on here, production wise. Like on the track 100K, which probably to some people's displeasure, you get the use of Busy Bone using auto-tune on his voice, which I was kind of the first time I heard it. Still kind of but I guess for me it's getting bearable, at least. I like the verses on that track, so I guess the hook doesn't bother me so much because I enjoyed the verse. Also another track on here called Repeller, which I like this track, but I'm so mad that it was so short. The instrumental was just a dude beatboxing, and then it also has some other vocals in the background, and I hate that this track was so short. I think Lazy Bone was the only one who had a verse on here. That this should have been one of those tracks that everybody I wish that everybody could have got on. I thought it was just creative, the use of them using a beatbox for the instrumental, and it was a nice switch up to the rest of the album, and it standed out definitely in a good way. Overall, this is for the most part, I'll say this is typical Bone Thugs. Like I said, one of the few knocks, the biggest knock, is that the heavy absence of Crazy and Wishbone is especially Crazy Bone. That's one of my favorite members. Might be him and Busy for me are like 1 and 2, or like 1A and 1B, but his I feel like he could have just made a lot of these songs better than what they were had he been on it, as well as Wishbone too. Some songs on here just screamed for a Crazy verse or a Wish verse, and you just never get it. But Another knock I would say on here is this album was 17 tracks, I believe, and there were a few cuts on here that were a little, I don't know. I enjoy the darker side of this album more. That reminds me of the vintage Bone Thugs. Then they have a few kind of softer, light-hearted tracks on here. One track, It'll Be Alright. Another track called Bring It Back. When you listen to it, you'll get what I'm talking about. Some of the tracks on here just aren't as gritty and as grimy as I would have liked them, but I guess it's just a personal preference. Not all of them are even bad songs, so to speak, but I just enjoyed the grittier part of the album. Definitely did it more for me. I'll say some of the hooks on this album aren't as memorable, I guess. They're not bad, but they're not, they're passable. They get by. But what saves, even if the hooks aren't that great, is that you still get that Bone Thug, fast flow, harmonizing, mixed in. Even with the absence of Crazy and Wishbone, Flesh and Bone, Busy and Lazy, they do a good job of carrying the weight. If you've been a fan since day one, you probably won't be disappointed with the verses on here. This album it's not stellar, it's not up there with, East 99 or the first Art of War, but this is a solid, a solid listen and a good fix for, I'd say, anybody who's a Bone Thugs fan and you just want to hear some material that you've never heard before. Then you'll probably enjoy this. You'll get a few cuts out of this album that you'll definitely enjoy. Like I said, my only knocks are, the absence of Crazy and Wish, and I wish the album could have stuck to more of the grittier dark side the whole way through, without mixing in some of the more, I guess, lighthearted mellow tracks. But I guess since the album was 17 tracks, maybe they just wanted to go for a little bit of diversity instead of having the same type sounding songs over and over again, which in that case I could understand. Standout tracks, World War III intro. The intro track definitely, like, for me, just set the mood that DJ Unique is back with that nice gritty sound. The intro gets that through real clear. That leads into Top Notch, which is another kind of vintage Bone Thugs, track. Murder on You is another standout one. That's one of my favorite tracks. Actually, I would say that probably is my favorite track on here. Partially because it's one of the few tracks that does have Crazy Bone on it. And it also, like I said, it has that vintage, like, Bone Thugs feel to it. Another song called Bone. That's a good track. I enjoy the singing hook. Can't remember the lady vocalist's name. I like the hook on that one. And I love the beat. I can never remember that sample that beat comes from, but it's very recognizable when you hear it. Approach to Danger was another one of my favorite cuts on here. Another track that featured Crazy. Nice, just dark, vintage Bone Thugs track on here. It's a Bone Thing was another favorite. I believe this was the same vocalist on the other track, Bone, that I mentioned. She does a good job of just, I don't know, I like her. I enjoy her hook, so that was another one of my favorite joints. Deep End was a good track. And Repeller, which I mentioned earlier, was another one of my favorites. It was a good switch up to the album. I enjoy beatboxing in general, so for me it was just cool to hear Lazy go in over a guy beatboxing with some vocals in the back. Only knock is, I wish I just could have got an extra verse from one other member. Just somebody else should have got on here besides him. And I like the closing track, Memory of Eazy-E, which, pretty much what the title states is a tribute to the late Eazy-E. Good way to close the track. But overall, like I said, this album wasn't great, but it wasn't terrible. It's somewhere middle of the road. I tend to enjoy the I'd say the first half of this album a little better than the second half. But I say though, if you're a Bone Thugs fan, you might as well, just pick this up, add it to the collection. You'll still get a few vintage, Bone Thug feeling tracks mixed in with a lot of little other, I guess, experimentation. Like I said on the track 100K with the auto tune and the beatboxing track, which I said still was one of my favorites. So yeah, it's it wasn't a bad listen. It was a little long. I think they could have cut 17 tracks, maybe down to like 15, and it might have made this a bit of a better listen. But I'm a Bone Thugs fan. I'll listen to anything they pretty much put out. So for me, I wasn't really disappointed. I got a nice solid listen. Some of these tracks I go back and listen to. And if you're a Bone Thugs fan, you'll probably feel the same way. Some of these tracks, you might not enjoy the whole album, but it'll be a good half, maybe a little more than half an album that you can probably get with and enjoy. I don't know if they'll ever fully get back together to do an official album, but I'm glad DJ Unique was back on the boards. Hopefully they come back with an official album. We can get Crazy and Wishbone actually on more tracks. But I guess for now they're probably all doing their solo things, which isn't bad. They're pretty good, decent solo artists as well as being in a group. But this gave me my fix, so I'm not gonna complain. Other people might feel different, but I'm satisfied with what I got. Another Bone Thugs CD added to the collection, which for me is never a bad thing. So if you heard it, let me know what you think. If you haven't heard it, go check it out. And yeah, 2 videos in one day probably won't ever happen again. This might actually make my break even longer from this video to the next one. But till next time, I will catch y'all later.